She didn't scream. That's the part I keep coming back to. I had given the order at dawn. By the time the messengers rode south, I was already back at my desk, already reviewing the next document, already deciding the next thing. That is how it works when you are me. You make the decision. You move on. You do not sit with it. I had burned things before. Cities, treaties, men's futures, carefully constructed over decades, reduced in an afternoon to something they would spend the rest of their lives trying to rebuild. I was not sentimental about it. Sentiment is what you feel when you've made the wrong decision. I rarely made the wrong decision. Her kingdom was small. A vassal state on the southern edge of Vorn territory, the kind of place that exists primarily as a line on a map and a number in a ledger. 12,000 people, 40 years of fragile peace, maintained by a royal line that had learned over generations to stay quiet and pay on time. She was the last of that line. I knew this. It was in the briefing. It was, in fact, the reason for the order. When a line ends, the territory reverts cleanly, without the complications of heirs and succession claims. It was efficient. It was correct policy. 3 of my advisors had recommended it. I signed the order before the ink on their recommendation was dry. I want to be honest with you about why I'm telling you this, not to excuse it. There is no excuse for it. I am telling you because what happened next makes no sense unless you understand what kind of man gave that order, the kind who does not expect to be thanked for it. The council called it a consolidation. That word did a lot of work in those years. Consolidation. It meant we are taking something that belonged to someone else, and we are doing it in a way that will not appear in the histories as taking. My grandfather had invented this vocabulary. My father had refined it. I had inherited it along with the throne, the debt, the 3 ongoing border disputes, and a kingdom that ran on fear the way other kingdoms ran on grain. Fear is reliable. That was the lesson. Loyalty expires. You can see it happen in a man's eyes, the slow erosion of it, the moment he starts calculating whether you're still worth the cost. Love was never in circulation to begin with, but fear compounds. Fear, properly maintained, becomes something almost structural. You stop needing to enforce it because the people inside it begin enforcing it on each other. I was good at this. The famines that had plagued the eastern provinces under my father's rule, gone within 6 years of my administration, because I found the 3 men who had been siphoning the grain supply and dealt with them in a way nobody who might consider siphoning could misunderstand. The border wars that had bled soldiers for 40 years resolved because I sat across from 3 separate enemy commanders and made clear with specificity what resolution would look like for them personally if they chose the alternative. I was not a good man. I had never tried to be. Goodness is a luxury for men who have not inherited a kingdom built on other men's graves. What I was for 26 years was correct. Her kingdom contributed 14% of the southern grain supply, held 2 strategic passes through the Vorn Range, and had been quietly negotiating with the Eastern Alliance for the past 18 months. Quietly, carefully, the way people negotiate when they know they are outmatched and are hoping not to be noticed until it's too late. I noticed. The order was signed. The riders went south. I moved on. What I did not move on from, and I did not understand this until much later, was a single line in the briefing document. The queen has no heirs. She has ruled alone since the death of her father 7 years prior. There is no court to speak of. She governs directly. I remember thinking, efficient, small operation, clean reversion. I did not think about what it meant to govern alone for 7 years. I did not think about what kind of person that makes you. I understand it now. She arrived on a Thursday, not with an army, not with lawyers or diplomats, or the elaborate machinery of formal protest that I had learned to expect from people who had received orders like mine. She arrived with 2 attendants, a horse ridden hard for several days, and a letter requesting an audience with the King of Vorn. My chamberlain brought me the letter with the expression he reserved for things he considered beneath my attention. I read it. I read it again. She was already inside the gates. There are protocols, layers of bureaucratic distance between a queen, whose kingdom I had just ordered burned, and the desk where I sit. She had walked through all of them. She had told the gate guards she was a merchant. The inner guard, she was a courier. My chamberlain's assistant, she was a minor noble with a land dispute requiring urgent resolution. Each lie technically specific enough to move her 1 layer deeper. By the time anyone thought to question the accumulation of it, she was standing in my antechamber. I should have had her removed. There is a message sent when someone breaches the King of Vorn's gate through deception and simply stands there, waiting. I said, "Bring her in. I cannot fully explain it. The closest I can get is this. I had read that line about governing alone for 7 years, and something in me, something I did not have a name for, something I had not used in long enough that I was not certain it still functioned, wanted to see what that looked like. She looked at my throne room the way people look at rooms they are already planning to rearrange. She was perhaps 30, dark eyes that took in the space with a quality I can only describe as assessment. Not fear, not awe, just the calm, systematic reading of a room by someone who makes decisions in rooms and wants to understand this one before she says anything. She was still wearing her riding clothes. There was dust on her boots. She had not asked for time to change. She did not bow. I noticed this. I noticed very specifically that I was noticing it. I said, "You have exactly 10 minutes. Whatever you came to say it." She said, "I'm not here to argue against the order." The room was very quiet. "Then why," I said, "are you here?" She looked at me. Not at the crown or the throne or the particular arrangement of power in the room. At me, the way almost no one looks at me anymore, which is to say directly, without the slight downward angle that people learn to maintain in my presence because meeting my eyes feels to most people like touching something they were warned not to touch. "I'm here," she said, "because I need you to understand what you're burning before you burn it." I should have ended the audience there. I said, "You have 9 minutes." She did not plead. She had not come to beg. She had come to testify, the way a witness testifies, not to change the verdict, because the record should exist regardless. She told me about the granary system her father had built in the southern passes, how it had taken 11 years and 2 failed harvests to get right, how it now fed not just her 12,000 people, but the 3 border villages on the Vorn side of the range that my own administration had written off as too remote to supply efficiently. She did not say this as accusation. She said it as fact, with the flat delivery of someone who has long since stopped expecting facts to change anything. She told me about the passes themselves, the specific way the rock formation in the second pass channeled snowmelt in spring, something no map showed because it required being there in the cold, watching it happen, to understand. She told me about a woman in the eastern village who had spent 30 years teaching children to read, using a curriculum she had built herself that existed nowhere else, that would be gone when the village was gone. She did not cry. I was watching for it, not out of cruelty, but because tears are information, and I had learned to read information wherever it appeared. Her eyes stayed dry, and her voice stayed level, and she moved from fact to fact with the precision of someone who had decided somewhere on that hard ride north exactly what she wanted to leave behind. 8 minutes. I said, "None of this changes the strategic calculus." She said, "I know. The order stands." "I know that too." "Then what?" I said. "Do you want from me?" She was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone searching for words, the silence of someone deciding whether to say the words they already have. "I want you to know their names," she said. "Not all of them. I know you don't have time for all of them, but some of them. The woman who teaches, the engineer who built the granary, the boy in the northern village who has never been outside the passes and has read every book I could find him and is 15 years old and has questions about the world that no one in my kingdom can answer any more." I said nothing. "I want you to know," she said, "that they are not a line in a ledger." The 10 minutes were up. I should have dismissed her. The audience was over. The order stood. I said, "Sit down." "I don't know why." "That is not entirely true." "I know exactly why, and I have spent a significant amount of time since then being uncomfortable with the answer. But in the moment, I told myself it was because I wanted to understand the granary system better. She sat. We talked for 3 hours, not argued, not negotiated. Talked, the way people talk when they have stopped performing and started exchanging information, which happens rarely in my court, and had not happened to me in so long that I had forgotten what it felt like. She knew things about the Southern Territory that were not in any briefing I had received. I knew things about the Eastern Alliance's intentions that made her go still and quiet for a moment before she recalibrated and continued. I was not gathering intelligence. I was finding reasons to keep talking. Toward the end of the 3rd hour she paused, mid-sentence, and looked at me with those dark, assessing eyes and said, "You didn't know any of this was here, did you?" It was not a question. I said nothing. "The order wasn't about my kingdom," she said. "It was about a line on a map and a number in a ledger and a threat that may or may not have been real." A pause. "I'm not angry about it. I understood when I rode north that that was what had happened. I just needed to know if you understood it too." The fire had burned low. My hands were on the desk in front of me. I noticed, with a dislocation I cannot fully describe, that they were completely still. They are never still. I have a general who once told me I look like I'm about to strangle someone even when I'm signing documents, and he was not wrong. There is always tension in them, always the slight curl of readiness that 26 years of ruling a kingdom built on fear puts into a man's hands. They were still. I looked at them for a moment. Then I looked at her. "Cancel the order," I said, not to her, to my chamberlain, who had been standing at the edge of the room for the past 2 hours with the expression of a man who had long since stopped understanding what he was witnessing. "Send riders tonight." He left. She did not say thank you. She looked at me for a long moment, that same direct look, the one that did not angle away. And then she said, "Why?" I said, "Because you were right. I didn't know what was there." She nodded slowly. The assessment in her eyes shifted into something I did not have a name for then. I have spent considerable time since trying to find one. "That," she said quietly, "is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 7 years. She stood. She straightened her riding clothes, still dusty, still worn from the road. She looked at me one more time. "Thank you," she said, "for the order and for this." I said, "You're thanking me for ordering your kingdom burned." "I'm thanking you," she said, "for being the kind of man who could change his mind." She left. I stayed until the fire went cold. The riders reached the southern passes before the torches did. I know this because I sent 3 separate messengers and did not sleep until the first confirmation returned. I have canceled orders before. I have never cared, in the hours between cancellation and confirmation, whether the cancellation held. I told myself it was administrative diligence. By the second confirmation, I had stopped telling myself that. She stayed for 4 more days. She moved through my court with the same quality she had brought into the throne room. The calm, systematic assessment of someone who makes decisions in rooms and wants to understand each one she enters. People watched her. My court is not accustomed to being assessed. They are accustomed to assessing. She spent most of the time in the library. I knew this because I walked past the library more frequently than the corridor required. On the second day I found her with 3 of my administrative records spread across the reading table. The Southern Territory taxation ledgers, 40 years of them, arranged in a sequence I did not immediately recognize. She did not look up when I entered. She said, "Your grandfather overtaxed the southern passes by approximately 30% for 11 consecutive years. The infrastructure deficit you're managing now is a direct result." I said, "Good morning." She looked up then. Something moved at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, the shape that lives just before a smile, in the moment when a person decides whether to allow it. She did not allow it. "Good morning," she said. "Do you want to know how to fix it?" We spent 4 hours on the ledgers. On the 3rd day, I did not manufacture a reason to pass the library. I went in directly, without announcement, and sat across the reading table and said, "The Eastern Alliance, the negotiations your kingdom was conducting. I need to understand how far they had progressed." She looked at me. "That information," she said carefully, "could be used to harm people I'm responsible for." "It could," I said. "I'm asking you to trust my judgment about how I'll use it." A long silence, the kind she was good at, not empty, not uncomfortable, but weighted like she was taking the full measure of something before she committed to a position. "All right," she said. She told me everything. The intermediaries, the terms, the specific fears that had driven her people toward the alliance in the first place. She held nothing back. I understood as she spoke that this was another form of testimony, not leverage, not negotiation. The simple transfer of truth from someone who had decided, for reasons I could not entirely account for, that I was worth being honest with. It was, I realized, the second time she had made that decision. I did not know what to do with the weight of it. On the fourth morning, she came to my study before I had sent for her. No one comes to my study uninvited. She knocked once, opened the door, and stood in the frame, the way she stood in all doorways, not entering, not leaving, occupying the threshold with a completeness that made the threshold feel like a position rather than a passage. She said, "I'm leaving this morning." I said, "I know. The passes will hold through winter with the current granary stores. In spring, there will need to be a conversation about the taxation structure. I'll send someone. Send someone who can listen," she said, "not someone who can negotiate. There's a difference." I said, "I know the difference." She looked at me in that way, the direct way, without the angle. "Yes," she said, "I think you do." She turned to leave. I did not call her back. There was nothing to call her back for. No unresolved administrative matter, no remaining intelligence to gather, no reason that would have survived scrutiny. My hands were on the desk, still. I looked at them for a long time. I have ruled this kingdom for 26 years. I have made 10,000 decisions, most of them correct, some of them at significant human cost, all of them made from the assumption that the calculus was clear and the variables were known. I had never doubted this. Doubt is what you feel when you don't have enough information, and I had always ensured I had enough information. I had missed an entire kingdom, 12,000 people, a granary system 11 years in the making, a woman who taught children to read for 30 years, a boy of 15 with questions nobody could answer, a queen who rode 4 days through hard country not to save herself, but to make certain that someone with power understood, before it was gone, what power was about to erase. I had missed all of it. The order had been correct by every measure I used to evaluate orders. That is the thing I have not been able to put down since. It was not a mistake by my own standards. It was my own standards that were wrong. She had understood this before she rode north, before she lied her way through my gates, before she sat across from me for 3 hours and testified with the flat precision of someone who no longer expected facts to change anything, but offered them anyway, because the record should exist. She had thanked me for the order, not despite what it was, because of what it revealed, that I was the kind of man who could hear something and change. She had wagered 4 days of her life and the whole of what remained of her kingdom's safety on that bet, on me being that kind of man. I am still not certain she was right. I sent a trade delegation to the Southern Passes 6 weeks later. I reviewed the taxation ledgers myself, all 40 years, and found the deficit my grandfather had built, and began the slow work of correcting it. I did not send for her. I constructed the reasons, discarded them one by one, because none of them survived the test I had apparently started applying to my own reasoning. Is this true? Or is this the story I'm telling myself about what's true? None of them were true. She had left one thing in the library, a small book, one of mine, taken without permission, which I had noticed and said nothing about, and now understood was the point. It was face down on the reading table, spine cracked at the page where she had stopped. I have not opened it. Every morning I walk into the library, and it is there, and I do not open it. And I am aware that this is a decision I keep making daily without fully understanding why. There is something in the not opening that I am not ready to give up, some version of the room as it was when she was in it, preserved in the closed pages of a book I already own and have already read, and could recite from memory if I chose. I don't choose. My hands, when I stand at that table, are still. I don't know what I'm waiting for. I think I do know. I think that's the problem.